What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Just wanted to remind you guys to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you end up enjoying this video. That goes a long way to helping the videos do well and making sure I can continue making daily videos for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in this video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as I love reading your guys' thoughts on the stories therein. Without further ado, I'll let you enjoy the next hour of true scary stories, and I'll see you guys again at the end of the video. This happened on a warm summer day when my twin and I were just 8 years old. We were heading to an ice cream shop with our mother. Cass and I were super excited because we almost never had money to go out and get a treat like this. We dressed up in matching summer dresses that had a cat chasing a ball of yarn on the bottom of the dress. Hers was pink and mine was purple. We both had our long hair done up in pigtails. We entered the shop and were excited, deciding what flavor of ice cream we were going to get today. At a table no more than 4 feet away from the door, an old man made a strange noise. He meowed like a cat, and when we looked over at him, he was licking at his hand and purring like a cat would. He pointed at our dresses, where the cats were, and smiled, revealing a major lack of teeth. Once more, he began meowing, making intense eye contact with us. We both just looked at each other, trying to hold back our laughter. He then made a hissing noise and reached for us. My mother, who had been watching from the front of us, after hearing the hiss, gave the old man a strange look and told us to keep walking. With the distraction of ice cream, my sister and I were completely sidetracked until we had to find a place to sit. My mother tactically picked the seats farthest away from this strange meowing old man. We were really enjoying our ice cream, making a bit of a mess actually, when the old man casually tiptoed over so that he was sitting at the table right in front of my sister and I. He was also behind my mother's back. He began licking at his hands again and staring at us, then began loudly meowing and attempting to purr. My mother got another strange look on her face, but she didn't turn around to look at the man. She just told us we were going to have to finish up outside. Unfortunately, we had to walk directly by him to leave. As we passed by, he pointed at us and in a weird high-pitched voice called out, "You like kitties? I'm a kitty myself. Take me home with you. I just want some lovings." He meowed again. With that, he began to stand up as if he were going to leave with us. Before my mother could even make sense of what to say, a man from a neighboring table, who must have overheard all of this, stood up. They stood between the man and us. "Yeah, I don't think so, pal." That's all the man said. I remember before leaving, I glanced over at that man's table, where his 2 sons were sitting. They were giving us equally weirded out looks at the situation that just occurred right in front of them. I shrugged as if to say I didn't know what this was all about either. My mom thanked the man who interfered, and we left, forcing her to choose between having 2 messy 8-year-olds eating melting ice cream in the car, or wait until we were done, with the possibility the strange cat man might come out and start following us. The entire way home, we had to lean out the car windows. The silence was only broken by humming noises and the occasional meow sound from my sister and I, followed by a giggle. Yeah, that was a really strange and creepy thing to happen in public. I don't know how we didn't get more weirded out at the time. This story may be very distressing for some. I've had some horrible experiences in the past, and I want to share these with all of you. It happened about 2 years ago. I got a job and moved out of my family home. One night, I was walking home from the station as usual. It wasn't a long walk at all, only about 5 minutes in total. I was heading home that night. when I suddenly felt as if something was out of place. I felt as though someone was following me. I turned around, but I didn't see anyone. I thought that maybe I was just being paranoid or something. But this odd feeling lasted about a week. Every time I was heading home after work from the station, I would feel that feeling as if I were not alone. It bothered me so much that I spoke to a work colleague about it. He told me that if I was worried or scared about what was happening, then I should tell somebody like the police or something. I didn't really think I had anything to go on. I mean, what could they even do about it if I told them I thought I was being followed? I just tried not to think about it. Then one night, though, something happened, and my paranoia was deemed justified. I got a letter at work that was addressed to me. I opened it, and immediately I began to scream. All that was inside was a simple note that said, "I'm always watching you." I showed it to my boss, but he didn't really seem to care. He wasn't interested at all, to be honest. This really scared me, though. I didn't know if it was just a prank because I had told my colleagues about my fears. I thought that note would be the worst thing that would happen, but I was proven wrong. Eventually, I got a call from a private number. I picked it up, and a male voice answered. "Are you just getting in? A little earlier than usual tonight, huh?" I was really scared and full of anxiety, but somehow I managed to muster up the courage to ask in what I guess was a very shaky voice, "Who are you?" I knew full well that this was likely the person who had been following me, the one who had sent that creepy letter to my workplace. "You're the guy that's been following me, aren't you?" He replied something along the lines of, "Oh, you noticed, huh? What a sharp sense of intuition you have. I'm actually surprised." I said I was going to call the police. "That doesn't matter," he replied instantly. I felt my spirit sinking in my chest like a lead weight. I hung up on the man and spent that night awake late, thinking there was nothing I could do about the situation. I felt so hopeless, I could barely sleep. I did come out of the situation, though, thinking that maybe it wasn't completely helpless. By the morning, I'd figured that whoever was stalking me knew my work and train schedule, so I decided to go to work by car instead. It was a little more inconvenient, but after that call, I didn't feel safe sat opposite a stranger on the train. I was still scared, though. I told my coworkers about what was going on. For a long while, there was actually nothing else. I figured the stalker must have now given up and lost interest. My fears returned, though, when I opened a letter one night after work. The letter had not been addressed. It had been hand-delivered. I knew the sender before I read a single word. This is what it said. "Yesterday, I saw a friend come over. You and her talked about me, huh? I'm so glad you care about me and that I'm a part of your life." Throughout the letter, it spoke of the contents of my friend and I's conversation. It was horrible. It was like somehow this person knew all my inner thoughts. I thought about it for a long while. The most logical conclusion I could come up with was that someone had somehow hidden a listening device somewhere in my home. If that was true, and I felt like it was 1,000% true at the time, it must have meant that someone had gone into my apartment. Some stranger had gotten in somehow. If you ever suspect this might have happened to you, you'll know how that realization makes you feel, so incredibly violated. I sat there thinking, I must have had a bunch of friends and coworkers over, not to mention the previous tenant that lived there and anyone they brought as well. I had no idea who the culprit could be. I mostly had women over since I'm a woman as well, but come to think of it, I'd had a mix of guys and girls over for a drinking party once. Coworkers and some other guys had been there too, some other friends also. I had no idea if any of them were shady or capable of becoming a stalker like this. There seemed to be no way to figure out who the guy harassing me was. It's not like I could just move out either. I just didn't have the money to do so. I didn't want a couple of weird letters and calls to let me leave the place I really loved. What was my alternative? Go back home and live with mom and dad? They weren't exactly local, Talking about my parents will send me down a whole nother rabbit hole, though. I just waited to see if things would quiet down after that, like it did before. I just kind of thought, maybe hoped is the operative word here, that the stalker had moved on. 3 months went by incident-free. I had returned to my usual work-life rhythm, and my confidence was starting to get back to where it was. I tried to carry on like nothing had happened. Things were all good for a while, until I came to a startling realization. I was missing something from my bedroom. Underwear. I was missing some underwear. At first, I thought all the usual thoughts, oh, did I lose it somewhere? I could understand me losing one article of clothing, like a bra or some panties or something. That kind of stuff happens to everyone, right? But 3? That's pretty weird. I live on the second floor of an apartment block, and I never dried my clothes outside on the balcony. Therefore, for them to have gone missing meant they must have been removed from my apartment directly. I knew that something very strange was going on. It was terrifying. I returned one night to find a memo attached to the fridge. It was just on your run-of-the-mill post-it note. My mom would actually come over sometimes and leave me something on the fridge like that. So at first, I thought it was a note from my mom, maybe. I took one look at the post-it note without reading its contents, and that told me already it was not written by my mother. Have you noticed that your underwear is missing? I guess you're wondering where it's gone, huh? Well, I have it. I was scared to the point which I didn't know what to do. I was being terrorized. I was being harassed. I called the police. I must have sounded so odd and dumb, but I told them everything that was going on. They were not the most helpful people to contact in that situation. I mean, they did listen and would try to help me and talk to me, but there wasn't much they could do without any evidence. They told me that the best bet would be to just move. It would be easier for everyone to just move apartments. That seemed to be the message coming out of everyone, my colleagues and friends too. Once again, I have to say I could not afford to do so. That's great advice for someone who has some extra money lying around, but I just couldn't do it. I hatched a genius plan after this. I figured that if I replaced the locks on all my doors and windows, then the trouble would end. I mean, replacing some locks seemed a lot cheaper and a lot less of a hassle than moving away. I felt like it worked for a while. I even left a pile of my underwear on the coffee table just to see if someone would snatch some away. For about 2 weeks or so, they'd remained untouched. Honestly, it was a temporary fix though. I mean, I couldn't really live there anymore confidently. I was a little reluctant at the time to admit that. I guess it was down to it being the first place I'd ever lived alone. I was unwilling to give it up to outside forces. I didn't want to be home alone at night though, so I decided to solve that problem by getting a night shift job. I did it on the hush-hush, not telling anyone and getting the cash by hand. If my day job knew I was moonlighting, I might have been in trouble anyway. I know, their sympathy for me and my situation is truly heartwarming, isn't it? My new part-time job kept me out of the house at night and helped me to save up some money. I decided to use some of that money I'd saved to get security cameras and some surveillance as well. I thought that if I found out who was doing this to me, I could finally show the evidence to the police and stop it all. Maybe I wouldn't have to move then. In Japan, honestly, stalking laws are quite lacking. They won't do much until something quote-unquote happens. They weren't going to help me. I figured I needed to try and help myself, right? I was really scared. I should say that I hated it. I hated that I had to work 2 jobs and be stressed all day and night. I was afraid of every guy that passed me on the street, not knowing who could be the one harassing me. The ones who smiled politely scared me the most. It wasn't their fault that I was scared, but that's how I would describe that period of my life. Things got a little better when a friend of mine reached out to me. He met me at work for lunch. We were close friends back in the start of our careers. We both joined the company at about the same time, so we'd gone through training and everything together. It was great to see him again, actually. He was really sweet and listened to all my complaints and troubles and tried to offer his own kinds of advice as well. He was such a nice guy during this tough time in my life that I ended up relying on him whenever I was down or upset. After having changed the locks, I felt as if I was free again. Nothing happened for the longest time. Then, about a half a year after the lock change, something else happened. I had to leave my job due to some family reasons. I was disappointed to be quitting. I guess for some it looked as if I was throwing in the towel or something. It certainly felt that way to me at times. In all honesty, though, it was out of my control. I broke the news to everyone and had a farewell party at work. I broke the news to the guy who had helped me through the tough times as well. I moved back to my hometown and settled back in. After a little while, he messaged me and said something like, "Hey, it's been a while. How you doing? Could we chat for a bit?" He invited me to meet him somewhere close by, and I accepted. The guy who'd been so nice to me got in touch and offered to come see me. I felt great about it, actually. It was like someone from a life I'd had once before was coming back to save me from my current life at home. I guess that doesn't make much sense unless you're me. Being back home was very rough. I guess that I was feeling nostalgic for the freedom I'd had before. I had a new job and things were going somewhat well. He wanted to meet me near a park close to my workplace. When we met up, we walked around the park a couple of times. We talked about work and life and a couple of memories we had together. I told him how I quit my job and all that stuff. He seemed happy I was doing well. I wanted to get across that I was in a much better place and genuinely happier than I thought I would have been to move back home. That was when he said something really strange. "I guess you don't care about my feelings then, huh? It's really insensitive, you know." I didn't really understand what he was talking about or where this was coming from. I wondered if I'd accidentally said something rude to him or took his sympathetic ear for granted. I'm sorry. I guess I shouldn't have unloaded all that trauma on you during those rough days. I thought you didn't mind, though. Did you not want to hear about all that stuff?" He replied as quick as a flash. "Yeah, I hate that stuff." It went super quiet. There was a weird atmosphere after he said that. I didn't want to talk to him anymore. Suddenly, he leaned over toward me and covered my mouth with his hand. I was scared and shocked by his actions. He covered my nose and mouth, and I couldn't breathe. As soon as he did that, I knew this guy was the guy who had been stalking me. I began to tremble. I felt as if I couldn't speak. I managed to utter a few shaky words. "You followed me. You were in my apartment." "Oh, good for you, huh? She finally noticed. God, I never knew you were this insensitive. I thought we were friends." "I didn't know," I said. "Well, we're very different people, aren't we? I wanted you to be mine. I tried to show you my intentions for months, but here I am again ending up in the goddamn friend role. I mean, how stupid are you? Can't you read the signs?" I was shaking like a leaf. He had his hands clamped over my mouth still, and one was digging into my shoulder. "Why didn't you notice me sooner?" I started to say some kind of muffled reply, and he cut me off. "Can't have you saying anything else." I had only known his kind and gentle side before that day. I didn't know he was capable of such blatant anger and evil. I could have never imagined he would flip out like this. I tried to break away from him, but he was too strong. He was scaring the living hell out of me. What he said next really made a shiver run down my spine. Relax. I don't want you to be mine in a place like this, but if you keep resisting, I guess I'll have to do it right here." The park was positively empty. He must have known it wasn't a popular one. I felt as if we were the only two people here. Just when it looked like he was about to do something terrible to me, I could see a dark look of contemplation dance across his face. At that point, someone else, should I say a dog walker, entered the park as well. I believe this had been highly unexpected for him, so he let go of me for a moment to appear normal. I looked toward the dog walker. I wanted to plead with her with my eyes to show her something was wrong here, and it wasn't my choice. When I locked eyes with this dog walker, I realized I recognized this person. She was a friend of mine, actually. She rushed over to me. Her dog wasn't a small dog, so the creep started walking toward the exit of the park quite quickly. I was left hyperventilating in her arms. The only word I could muster was why. She replied that she'd always suspected he was the guy that was following me. She told me later that he had made no secret that he liked me. He told numerous people at work that he had a crush on me. She felt I was the only one who didn't know this. When all that stuff started happening to me at work, people naturally looked his way. They couldn't do anything though because he quit the company right as the locks got changed. I didn't know he'd quit because I barely knew this guy existed until he interrupted while I was at my lowest point. Apart from when I'd first started working at the company, I really didn't see him at all. He was much older than me. He was told as he was leaving by the people at work that if anything happened to me or my place, the police would be called and he would be the first suspect. I guess that's around the point when half a year went by without him doing anything. It all started to make sense to me. It turned out that my friend wasn't there by chance either. She'd seen this guy heading in the direction of my parents' home and decided to follow us to the park. Thank God she did. After everything that went down, I managed to move out of my parents' home and get my own place. The company I worked for is still operating just fine. I moved miles and miles away now, though. It was a horrible time for me. I didn't ever go back to that secluded park again. I often think about how close I came to having something irreversibly horrible be done to me by someone I thought was a close friend. It's something that terrifies me on a daily basis. I was 23 years old when this happened and was living in the city of brotherly love at the time, Philadelphia. The girl I was dating lived about 35 to 45 minutes out of the city. After hanging out for a while, I left her place at around 12:30 a.m. or so. I really shouldn't have stayed out that late because I had an early shift that morning. As soon as I left her neighborhood, I noticed that my gas light was on. I put in directions to the nearest gas station on my GPS and drove 5 minutes to the local Wawa. I was familiar with this area, and it was very low on crime, unlike many other places outside of Philly. Stopping here late at night wasn't something I was particularly nervous about because of this. There were 2 other cars parked there when I pulled in. I filled up my tank and realized that 2 of my tires were low on air as well. I drove to the corner of the parking lot where they had the air pumps stationed. I started working on my first tire. When I looked up, I saw an older pickup truck pulling into the lot. I didn't really think twice about it until it drove up right next to my car. And the truck began backing into the area where the other air pump was. Any other day, I would have just assumed it was someone else trying to put air into their tires, but something gave me a bad feeling about this. The driver exited the truck and looked at me. He was in his late 50s or early 60s and had scruffy facial hair. He had glasses as well and kind of looked like a stereotypical creeper. He just stood by his driver's side door and stared at me. This was when I began to feel more uneasy. "Is your pump out of order, sir?" I tried to ask, trying to break the tension. The man didn't respond, though. He just kept giving me a cold stare. He finally moved away from the door and reached into the bed of his truck, his eyes never leaving me. He produced a rope and began sprinting toward me. I immediately threw down the air nozzle and jumped into my car, which was already running. I threw it into drive when suddenly a hand slammed directly on my driver's side window. It dragged sideways as I peeled out of there, leaving a smear. As I was driving home, my heart was pounding out of my chest. I've never had anything like that happen to me. 2 weeks later, a girl I was friends with on Instagram posted an article about multiple abductions in the Westchester area. I immediately thought back to that man in the truck. I'm thankful that I was able to escape. I almost became a statistic that night. This was in the mid-2000s, when I was in about the 2nd or 3rd grade. I lived in the rural Midwest and went to a decent-sized elementary school. For a few weeks, a friend of mine that I chatted with often was absent from school. I was confused and curious as to why he hadn't been attending for so many days in a row. I soon found out from the other kids that he was taking some time to rest and recover after a very traumatic experience in his family. I'm not going to reveal names, as for one, I don't remember the boy's name, and I also don't want to reveal any personal info about these people. For the sake of easier reading, I'll call the boy Mike. The standard chats and the occasional gossip I'd share with friends on the playground and in the cafeteria took a very dark turn once word got out of why Mike was absent. You see, one day, a friend of mine who we'll call Chad told us that Mike's mother had been murdered. I learned that this horrible act was carried out by the boyfriend of Mike's sister. The killer had snuck into the bedroom of his girlfriend's mother and either stabbed her to death or slit her throat in her sleep. I don't remember the exact details. I was only 9 or 10 years old, so hearing this was especially shocking. Having something like that happen so close to me was something I never imagined possible. According to Chad, the mother didn't want her daughter's relationship to get intimate until she and her boyfriend were married. She also didn't want them to get married until they'd been together a few years. She had gotten to know the guy well enough to know he would not treat her daughter well. Well, the sister's boyfriend was furious at this and believed the best way to get what he wanted would be to eliminate what he saw as a roadblock. I was disgusted and disturbed at such a pathetic and creepy move. The so-called man murdered an innocent woman just because he wanted to be intimate with her daughter. He was actually delusional enough to believe she would just go along with him after he carried out that gruesome act. I remember one day on the way back home from school, my mom pointed out the funeral procession was happening around the neighborhood we lived in. It honestly surprised me that this all took place so close to where we lived. I remember seeing Mike in his black suit and tie, a very somber and serious look on his face. At school, I remembered him being a pretty easygoing and cheerful boy who enjoyed having fun and cracking jokes with me. Seeing him like this hurt. I can only imagine how this terror affected him, or like this seems like it would stay with you. I don't even remember if Mike ever came back to school for the rest of the semester, or if he didn't do so. I have no idea. I don't know what I would have even said to him if he did. What the hell can you say to someone who just had their life so cruelly changed at a young age? What do you say to someone whose mother was just taken from them by a heartless monster? Something about my memory of this being hazy unnerves me. I wonder if being hit with this cold reality at such a young age influenced my often cynical outlook on the world. I hope Mike and his family are doing well now, because no one deserves to have to go through that. This happened during the summer of 2021 in California. We were out and about in our city, running some errands and enjoying the summer weather. We realized that we needed to grab a few things for dinner that night, so we stopped by a Trader Joe's to shop. As I pulled my car up, we started to exit when a second car pulled in right next to mine. I happened to look over my shoulder and see a black man in what looked to be his late 50s. He had a look of pure anger on his face. He called me over to him. I approached the car to see what was going on. I figured it was still daylight, around 7 o'clock that night, and we were in front of the store where other people were around. What's the worst that could really happen? I walked over and the man was smoking a cigarette, still menacingly glaring at me. "Thank you for not ignoring me," the man growled. I remained calm but was already on edge. "What's up, man?" I asked him. The man took another drag of cigarette, and I noticed his knuckles were bleeding. This guy had clearly busted them on either a wall or someone's face, and based on how aggressive he was being towards me, I suspected it was the latter. "I'm really pissed off," he said, as if I couldn't already tell. "My daughter just got the shit beat out of her, and I'm trying to get out to her." I didn't know what to say other than, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." I'm ashamed to admit that I was getting scared both for my fiancée and myself. The man locked eyes with me. "Yeah, so I need some money," he growled again. "I'm not a bum, I'm not a bad guy, I just need some money to get to my daughter, okay? And you're gonna help me." I couldn't help but look down and see that he'd kept his hand under his seat. I'd seen this move before in movies and TV shows. There was a high chance that this man had some kind of gun or other weapon on him and was either going to rob us, shoot us, or both. I was panicking on the inside and only said, "Yeah, man, sure, let me go inside and get some cash." You may call me an idiot for that, but I was trying to think of a way to get out of the situation without setting this obviously unstable guy off. My fiancée looked at me and asked what was going on. As I walked back to the front of the car, I didn't answer her. I then contemplated what would happen if we went to the next store. He was parked next to my car and still staring at us. I couldn't come out empty-handed or call the police and risk them not coming on time, or at all for that matter. I knew I had one shot at making a move. I told my fiancée to get back in the car and I would explain later. I walked to my driver's seat. The man then looked at me again. "You going to get me some money?" he demanded. I nodded my head. "Yeah, man, just wait here. I'll be right back." Thank God he believed my story and didn't follow us out. I got in the car and immediately drove away. My fiancée looked over at me again and asked me what was going on. I told her what happened and that we needed to go to a different store for our groceries. My fiancé was completely understanding and supportive. I have a history of severe anxiety, and I was completely caught off guard by that situation. Needless to say, I took multiple back roads to the Trader Joe's in our neighborhood. I was on edge for the rest of the night, and also paranoid about the man following us or finding my car somehow. Let this be a lesson to all of you out there. I don't care how big and tough you think you are. Never approach a stranger's car at all. I'm a pretty tall and muscular guy, and this was scary even for me. I went out one evening to do a little shopping and ended up experiencing something truly unique and terrifying. I went to a place in Saitama. It's only about an hour away from my place by bike. I don't mean push bike, by the way. I ride a motorcycle. It seemed like a great evening to head on out, as there was this stillness in the air. No wind, hadn't rained that day, and it didn't look like it was about to either. As far as I was concerned, conditions were really perfect for a ride. The only problem was I had never been to Kawagoe before, so I got a little lost along the way. I say lost, but I was in the city, so I don't mean I was stuck in the middle of nowhere or anything. I had a rough idea of where I should be going because of all the signs and stuff, and I wasn't in too much of a rush. I was just happy to be someplace new. After about 10 minutes of riding around the city, I ended up turning down a one-lane road. Cars were barely able to pass by each other. It seemed like it was kind of a traffic loophole used by the locals, a shortcut. There was traffic though. I would say there was 10 cars ahead of me. Even though I was on a bike, I thought there wasn't enough room to chance it by trying to skip ahead. In the middle of this traffic lineup was a delivery truck. For some reason, I noticed it immediately, before any of the following events took place. Anyway, the light turned green, and the traffic began to move. It seemed like the intervals between green lights, amber, and red were pretty short, so everyone moved quite quickly. The truck, however, didn't move at all. I was stuck behind it, so I just sat there on my bike a little bit confused. I was not that interested, to be honest, though. The car behind me didn't honk its horn, so I thought there was no point trying to chase the truck driver off either. I really hated it when people honked their horns. After the light changed, we still waited, and we didn't move until the light turned red again. We didn't move at all. I just want to say that there was space for 4 other cars ahead of this truck. What was the holdup here? I wondered if this guy was out making a delivery, and that was why the truck was stalled. It seemed super insensitive and idiotic to leave it smack dab in the middle of a 1-lane road, though. Why not just park it somewhere else, or put on the hazards or something at least? I didn't care if he was delivering something. I couldn't sit here and wait through multiple green lights. I thought, screw this. I pulled out from behind in an attempt to overtake it. I wondered if I'd get a look at the guy who was holding things up, or at least confirm that he was making a delivery. As I passed by, I was curious. I took a look into the driver's side window. I heard myself say aloud, "What the fuck?" It came out involuntarily. I pulled my bike to a stop, as the shock almost made me lose control. The guy inside was dead. I didn't even think there would be someone sat in the driver's seat, but here I was looking at a man's dead body. His hands were gripping the steering wheel still, and his head was towards the dashboard, just next to the wheel. His face was facing my way, slightly leaning against the steering wheel. I'll never forget the look on his face. His eyes were dead, rolled back slightly, revealing the whites of them. They were tinged red from the veins. My mouth was open. The man's tongue was visible. His open mouth was protruded toward me. I didn't see any obvious signs of trauma, blood, or bruising. His truck didn't show any damage either. Whatever happened to him to kill him likely happened very quickly. I thought he must have had a heart attack or something. I never dreamed I would see anything like that on the streets in real life. It really set my head spinning. I couldn't compose myself for a couple of seconds. Eventually, I snapped out of it and put my mind into action. I needed to inform everyone behind me that this guy wasn't going to be moving anytime soon. I also needed to inform emergency services. I pulled my bike over as much as I could and kicked out the stand. I went about taking my helmet off and heading back to the truck to find the name of this poor guy. I stopped in my tracks and saw something I couldn't believe. I thought I'd lost my mind. The truck roared to life and began to pull forward, as if nothing had happened. I ran towards the truck just in time to see the driver's face through the windshield. All of a sudden, it looked like he was perfectly fine again. I didn't know what the hell was going on. His expression was cheerful and full of life. He left me standing there dumbfounded by the side of the road. I couldn't understand what just happened. One thing is for certain. That guy was definitely 100% dead. I can't get his face out of my head no matter how hard I try. Another thing I've thought about is why didn't any of the other drivers seem to care that they were being held up, or even react when the driver drove off? Was this some kind of weird glitch in the Matrix or something? I don't know, but it was really strange and creepy. This happened about 15 years ago. I was 21 years old and living in my very first apartment. It was a small bachelor apartment in a sketchy area. I grew up in a town that was known to be rough and tough, and I knew how to handle myself. I learned at a young age to keep my head down and not go looking for trouble. My apartment building was behind a bar. A lot of the patrons of the bar would stand outside and smoke. When they did this, they would be facing my apartment. Most of the smokers would just keep to themselves, but a few would say hello if I passed by. I never really had any issues until this one evening. That night I came home from work. I passed by the bar and saw this extremely tall man outside smoking. As I passed by, he glared daggers at me, and I gave him a slight nod. He acknowledged me and continued staring at me. It made me uncomfortable. I didn't really think much of it though. About an hour later, I got a sudden knock at my door. It was odd because you have to buzz people into the building. The complex only had 8 units, and I didn't know any of my neighbors. I froze because I didn't really want to talk to anyone. The knocking continued nonetheless. I shouted out, "Who is it?" A voice on the other side replied, "It's Tom." I don't know anyone named Tom. I think you must have the wrong apartment. The voice then said this, "You don't know me, but I know you. Open up so we can talk." I walked over to the peephole and saw it was the tall man from outside the bar. I yelled out again, "Fuck off or I'm calling the cops." I heard him walking away and heard the exit door opening and closing. He was gone, or so I thought. A few minutes later, I peeked out the window and saw that the tall man was standing in the parking lot. He appeared to be talking to himself. At this point, I was freaking out. I called up my landlord who lived in the building next to me. He told me to call the police, and in the meantime, he and his brother would go check things out. I called the cops and told them what was going on. They said they would send out a car. My landlord and his brother made their way to the parking lot. I watched from out my window and saw them approach the man. He took a single look at them and took off running. My landlord and his brother tried chasing the man down, but he got away easily. 5 minutes later, the police arrived, and I gave my version of events, as well as a description of the man. The officer stared at me for a moment. "It's a good thing you didn't answer that door, ma'am. We've had reports come in of a man matching that description, attacking women lately." A few days later, I got a call from the officer. He told me that as a part of their investigation, they were talking to the owner of the bar. The owner informed them that the tall man had appeared there, and the police responded and arrested him. I'm a 36-year-old woman, and I wish this wasn't real. Let me start off by saying it's crazy how children are so trusting. Maybe it's just me. When I was 7 years old, my parents and I were living in a basement apartment in the Bronx. The way the apartment was set up had my mother and father's room at one end of a short hall. The bathroom was in the middle and my room was at the other end. If you don't know anything about a basement apartment, just know that it doesn't take much effort at all to enter one. You can easily get in through a window. One very early morning, possibly around 7 or 8, I suddenly felt an intense pain in my buttocks. I got up thinking our cat had gotten into my room and scratched me or bitten me, as she used to nip hard and attack whenever she felt like it. I jumped up, looking for her, only to see a grown man sitting on my bed. I remember being really upset and asking him why he'd pinched me. He hushed me and said something about being thirsty. I remember pulling down my nightgown to cover my butt and asking him if he wanted juice or water. I wasn't scared at all, more surprised and mad that this man had pinched me. He said he wanted some juice. I left my room and closed my door, with this random stranger still sitting on my bed. I walked to the kitchen and grabbed some juice. As I was bringing the cup back to my room, I looked over at my parents' door. I thought I should wake them up, but I can't remember why. I decided against it. I ended up giving the man the cup, and he drank the juice. I remember he asked me if I could help him find his friend, and told me that he was lost. I remembered my dad had told me I wasn't allowed to go outside without him or my mother. They were worried, as this was a new neighborhood, and we had only moved in 2 weeks earlier. I remember being scared to go outside because I didn't want my parents to be upset with me. I told the man I had to wake up my parents and ask them. I remember he said it would be real quick because he knew his friend was somewhere in the area and it would be perfectly fine. We would find him quickly. I once again said no and told him I was not allowed to go outside without my parents. He ended up saying he didn't need my help anymore and that he would find them on his own. He asked me to lock the door behind him. I walked him out to the front door, waving goodbye. I tried to go back to sleep, but it was too late. I was wide awake, so I started watching cartoons. Well, the volume happened to be much louder than expected because my mother woke up and asked me very angrily why I was awake so early. I told her about the man who'd pinched my butt. At first, she didn't believe me, as she thought I'd had a bad dream. She lifted up my nightgown, though, and I guess I must have had a bad bruise. I'll never forget how she suddenly got so calm and started smiling at me with a very sweet voice, asking me what he looked like. She asked what happened, too, and if I remembered what he was wearing. I told her, and she left my room for a moment, coming back with my dad. She told me to tell him everything as well, using that same sweet voice. I didn't think that I was in trouble or anything. I thought I had made a new friend. After telling them about this new friend, they got dressed and started searching. Well, it didn't take long to find him at all, because he happened to be the superintendent's family member. When I saw him, I immediately shouted at him, "Hey, friend!" My parents told me to go back inside, which I did. An hour or so later, my parents came back with some McDonald's for me. They seemed angry, though. Before the end of that day, my father put a padlock on my door and told me that whenever I went to sleep, I should always lock my door, as our kitchen windows didn't lock. I guess that's how the man got in. Sometime later, when I was 15, I found out the guy was actually mentally ill and was sent away from the Dominican Republic by his family, so he wouldn't get arrested for something he'd done out there with another little girl. It still surprises me that I wasn't scared in the moment. If you or anyone you know lives in a basement ground-level apartment or a flat, please triple-check that all the window locks work, and always lock your windows as well. This happened around 2019. I'm happy to say that I'm a 25-year-old woman, but at the time this took place, I was 19 years old. A little backstory. I live in Queens, New York, in a very populated area. I always used to have to walk from my house to the gym and blasted music on my headphones all the time. It was a 45-minute walk, and I was never really scared of it. I used to do it all the time. Besides, there was so many people around. What was the worst that could really happen? Well, that's what I used to think at least. Anyway, on to the story. I was on my way back home from the gym on this night when for some reason I heard the voice in the back of my head turning me to turn back. It was telling me that I was in danger, over and over. I had my headphones in, and I decided I needed to listen to my surroundings. I completely silenced my music and decided to look behind me. I had seen a white man with a blue t-shirt and dark jeans. I honestly don't know how to explain this, but the look he had while he was staring at me from behind, it wasn't a perverted look, but more of a psychopathic one. I really don't know how to explain. It wasn't like something suggestive or flirty. Besides, even if it was, I would never put myself in that situation. After that, I noticed the man was following me. Every time I stopped, he stopped as well. Every time I walked, he walked too. He was like that for a good 4 blocks. That is, until I saw a fire hydrant and decided to sit on top of it and smoke a cigarette. I wanted to think and relax and see if the man would pass me by. Turns out he didn't. With me being so stressed out, I had never paid attention to the store in front of me. It had a clear glass door, and there was a guy inside speaking to someone on the phone. Please remember him. This is really important in the story. I threw my cigarette and decided to go into this grocery store, then get a bottle of water, just so the store attendant wouldn't think I was weird or something. I went and grabbed the water bottle and paid the store attendant. As soon as he saw me, he noticed my face and that I was in distress. Mind you, my hands were shaking as I handed the cash to the clerk. I mean, who knows what this freak wanted to do to me? The store clerk asked me what was wrong, and I told him this weird guy was following me. He asked me who it was, so he could check the cameras. Lo and behold, the psycho was outside, standing next to the door and out of sight. Maybe a minute passed by. Remember when I said the door had a clear glass door? The next thing I know, he'd pressed his face right up against it, with both of his hands cupped. We made eye contact, but his stare was not normal. Never have I dreaded something so much in my life. My heart immediately dropped into my stomach. I felt like I wanted to vomit, in all seriousness. Thank God the guy never entered the store. I stayed in the store for about 15 to 20 minutes. The store clerk then told me he was gone, and I was safe now. I was so scared to go outside, though. I still had a 15-minute walk home, and who knew if he'd just crossed the street and was waiting for me or something. I opened the door and looked from left to right, and across the street. I had 1 foot in the store, and 1 foot out the door. I honestly didn't even want to leave at that point. Well, remember when I said there was this guy that was on the phone? Well, he wasn't on the phone anymore. He had his bike next to him, and he'd also noticed my face and how scared I was. I was honestly shitting bricks at this point. The man asked me what was wrong. I told him this weird guy was following me, and I was really scared. He asked me who the guy was. He then went on to describe exactly what the guy looked like, and asked if it was him. I immediately told him yes, and asked him how he knew. What he said next gave me even bigger chills. He said that he'd seen him outside the store, and the man had asked him if he'd seen his girlfriend that went inside. He also said that he was standing around for a good 20 minutes. I had never felt so scared in my life. If I told you before that my heart dropped into my stomach, well, this time I almost shit it out. Thankfully, the guy offered to walk me home safely. At the time, he was my guardian angel and blessing. He walked with me the whole 15 minutes, and I'm very thankful for his help. I don't know if this is scary to most of you, but it definitely was with me. My advice to all of you is to always trust that voice you hear in your head, and trust your gut instinct as well. When I was a little girl, my family lived in the bad part of the neighborhood. Many would refer to this as the ghetto, and I would agree. There are many things I could talk about, but I'm going to talk about an incident that happened to my mom. I was 5 years old, and my brother was around 3. My mom was feeding my baby sister when she heard a banging on the door. I later found out that it was someone kicking it. It was getting close to dinner time, so my mom wasn't expecting anyone. The only person she knew would be home soon would be our dad. Why would our own father knock on his own door? She went over to look out the window that was next to the door, and she saw a teenager standing there. My mom had seen this teen living in our area with his mother. The guy kept looking back at the driveway and talking to someone. My mom knew this looked sketchy, and knowing that she had 3 small children, one of whom she was holding, she waited to see what would happen. He banged once again on the door, and then continued talking to someone. My mom was trying to keep us kids quiet, so the dude wouldn't know that we were home. When he tried to kick the door again, my mom took her fist and banged on the door as hard as she could. It turns out there were 4 or 5 guys, that were hiding in our front yard. She had realized that when she banged on the door. She had scared the guy, and he took off running with his friends, them all coming out of their hiding places. She soon called the cops and told them what happened. I don't really remember if they ever got arrested or not. My dad later told me that he saw those same two boys trying it again, and he chased them away. I'm 21 years old now, and I still thank God he gave me a brave mother who would protect her children from harm. For anyone out there who's living in a scary area, either please get out of there, or if you can't, use your Second Amendment to keep yourself and your loved ones safe. I was driving me and two of my friends to their house, and we stopped right next to this car at a stoplight. We were in the left turn lane, and the car next to us was going straight. Well, I happened to look over and saw that there was nobody driving this car. Mind you, this was before the days of self-driving cars and Google Maps and all that. I was shocked and puzzled and didn't say anything. I thought I was just seeing things, or perhaps even going nuts. Finally, one of my boys piped up, "Are you guys seeing this car next to us?" or something to that effect. We all did see it. What the hell was going on here? We were all excited, confused, and also relieved that we weren't the only ones witnessing this ghost car. The light turned green. We made our left turn, and to our surprise, the car began driving by itself and went straight ahead. I turned right on the next road, and we ended up driving past that same car once more. This time, it was stopped at a stop sign, so we got a clear front view of it. There was nobody inside at all. One of the creepiest moments of my entire life. A story I've suddenly remembered from long ago, when I was probably 3 years old. One of my earliest memories. I remember my dad took me to the park one day. On the way there, we passed by those openings between where the road ends and the sidewalk begins, probably for draining excess rainwater. I was pretty bored, so I crouched down and tried to look into it. To my astonishment, I saw someone's face smiling at me from inside. Being 3 years old, I didn't really think anything of it. In fact, I found it somewhat funny, so I laughed and waved back to this person. They moved around for a bit, cocking their head, and then slipped away out of sight. Thinking they were done with me, I got up and moved along. Naturally, my dad was curious as to what I saw. I told him exactly. "There's a man that lives in there." He ignored it, not taking me, the 3-year-old, too seriously. Maybe I only imagined it, but that would have been tantamount to a serious hallucination, which I've never had a history of. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in the comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.